The engine roar was deafening as I watched my custom Cessna Citation touch down on what used to be my Aunt Patricia's neighbor's cornfield. Through the cockpit window, I could see her standing on her front porch, mouth hanging open, clutching her morning coffee like it was the only thing keeping her upright. 23 years she'd been telling me I'd never amount to anything, never leave Millbrook, never prove her wrong. Well, Patricia, here's your wake-up call at 30,000 feet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Millbrook, Ohio, population 2,847. Everyone knew everyone's business before they knew it themselves. My name is Derek Hutchinson, and for the first 18 years of my life, I was just another face in the crowd at Millbrook High. Another kid who'd probably end up working at the grain elevator or maybe, if I was lucky, managing the hardware store downtown. My Aunt Patricia lived 3 houses down from us on Maple Street in a pristine white colonial that looked like it belonged in a magazine. She was my dad's older sister, the one who'd married well, whose husband owned the largest insurance agency in the county. She had opinions about everything and everyone, and she never hesitated to share them, especially when it came to me. That boy's got his head in the clouds, she'd tell my mother every Sunday after church, loud enough for half the congregation to hear. Always drawing those airplane pictures, talking about flying somewhere exotic. Mark my words. Sarah, heal. Never leave this town. Boys like Derek, they think big, but they settle small. It's just the way things are. My mother would smile politely and change the subject, but I heard every word. I was 12 when Patricia first said I'd never leave Millbrook, and something about the certainty in her voice lit a fire in me that never went out. I spent my teenage years working every job I could find. Weekends at Morrison's farm baling hay, summers at the local car wash, evenings stocking shelves at the grocery store, while other kids were playing video games or hanging out at the lake. I was saving every penny, dreaming of the day I'd prove Patricia wrong. The turning point came during my senior year when Mr. Kellerman, our economics teacher, brought in a guest speaker named Marcus Webb. Marcus had grown up 2 towns over in a place just as small as Millbrook, but he'd built a multi-million-dollar logistics company that moved freight across 3 states. He wore a suit that probably cost more than my dad made in a month. He talked about opportunities like they were just sitting there waiting for someone brave enough to grab them after his presentation. I approached him with a business plan I'd been working on for months. It was rough around the edges, handwritten on notebook paper, but it outlined my idea for a regional delivery service that could connect small towns to major distribution centers using a network of independent drivers. Marcus looked it over, asked me a few questions, and then did something that changed my life forever. "Kid, this isn't half bad," he said, folding up my papers. "You've got something here, but you need capital and experience. I'll make you a deal. Come work for me for 2 years. Learn the business from the ground up. And if you're still serious about this idea, I'll help you get the funding to make it happen." I graduated on a Friday and started working for Marcus the following Monday. My Aunt Patricia made sure to remind me at the graduation party that most people who leave small towns end up crawling back within a year, usually broken and broken. "You'll see, Derek, the world out there isn't like Millbrook. People won't coddle you or give you second chances. You'll be back by Christmas. Mark my words." But I wasn't back by Christmas. Wasn't back the next Christmas either, threw myself into learning everything I could about logistics, supply chain management, customer relations, and business operations. Marcus was a demanding boss, but he was also a mentor who saw potential in me that I didn't even know I had. The first year was brutal. I worked 16-hour days, lived in a studio apartment that barely had room for a bed and a desk, and ate more ramen noodles than any human should consume in a lifetime. But I was learning, absorbing everything like a sponge, slowly building the foundation for something bigger. By the end of my second year, I had saved enough money and gained enough experience to launch my own company. Marcus kept his word and helped me secure a small business loan, even investing some of his own money in exchange for a minority stake in the business. Hutchison Logistics started with me, a used cargo van, and a cell phone. My first client was a small manufacturing company that needed someone to handle their regional deliveries. The pay wasn't great, but it was a start. And I treated that contract like it was worth $1 million. Word spread quickly in the small business community. I was reliable, affordable, and willing to take on jobs that the bigger companies wouldn't touch. Within 6 months, I had 3 drivers working for me. Within a year, I had 12. By the end of year 2, Hutchinson Logistics was operating in 4 states with a fleet of 37 vehicles. The growth was intoxicating, but it also brought challenges I hadn't anticipated. Managing employees, dealing with insurance companies, navigating government regulations, handling customer complaints. It was like drinking from a fire hose every single day. There were nights I questioned whether I'd bitten off more than I could chew, whether Patricia might have been right about me after all. But then something happened that put everything into perspective. One of my drivers, a guy named Tony Rodriguez, came to me with a problem. His daughter needed surgery, and his insurance wouldn't cover all the costs. He was looking at a bill that would bankrupt his family, and he was considering quitting to take a job with better benefits. Instead of letting him go, I found a way to improve our company's health insurance plan, and even set up a small emergency fund for employees facing unexpected medical expenses. Tony stayed. His daughter got the surgery she needed. And word spread that Hutchinson Logistics was a company that actually cared about its people. That's when I realized I wasn't just building a business, I was building something that mattered. We weren't just moving packages from point A to point B. We were connecting communities, supporting families, and creating opportunities for people who might not have had them otherwise. The contracts kept getting bigger. We started handling distribution for a major retail chain, then a pharmaceutical company, then a food service provider. Each new client brought new challenges, but also new possibilities. I reinvested every dollar of profit back into the company, upgrading equipment, expanding our service area, and hiring the best people I could find. 5 years after leaving Millbrook, with nothing but a handwritten business plan and a stubborn refusal to accept limitations, Hutchinson Logistics was generating over $50 million in annual revenue. We had offices in 8 states, employed over 300 people, and had earned a reputation as one of the most reliable logistics companies in the Midwest. But even with all that success, I never forgot where I came from or the woman who was so certain I'd never amount to anything. Every major milestone, every new contract, every expansion into a new market, Patricia's voice was there in the back of my mind, reminding me of all the reasons I was supposed to fail. It wasn't about proving her wrong anymore. It was about proving to myself that the only limitations that really mattered were the ones I accepted. By year 7, Hutchinson Logistics had caught the attention of some major players in the industry. We were handling supply chains for Fortune 500 companies, and our reputation for solving complex logistical challenges had spread far beyond the Midwest. But with success came a new set of problems I hadn't anticipated. The bigger we got, the more complicated everything became. We were dealing with international shipping regulations, customs paperwork, and coordination across multiple time zones. I found myself spending more time in conference rooms and less time actually running the business I'd built from the ground up. That's when I met Elena Vasquez at a logistics conference in Denver. She was the CEO of a mid-sized freight brokerage firm based in Phoenix, and she had a proposition that would change everything. Elena had been watching our company's growth. She believed there was an opportunity for a strategic merger that would create one of the largest independent logistics networks in the country. The numbers were staggering. Combined, our companies would control over $200 million in annual revenue, employ nearly 1,000 people, and have the infrastructure to compete directly with the industry giants. But Elena wanted more than just a business partnership. She was talking about revolutionizing how goods moved across North America. Her vision involved leveraging emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and blockchain to create a completely transparent, efficient supply chain network. Instead of just moving packages, we'd be providing real-time data analytics, predictive modeling, and customized solutions that could save our clients millions of dollars annually. The merger took 18 months to complete. During that time, I learned more about corporate law, regulatory compliance, and international business than I'd ever imagined possible. There were moments when the complexity of it all made me long for the simplicity of driving that first cargo van, but Elena kept pushing me to think bigger. "Derek, you're not just a truck driver who got lucky," she told me during one particularly stressful negotiation session. "You're a visionary who understands something most people in this industry don't, that logistics isn't about moving things. It's about connecting people to opportunities." The combined company, which we named Horizon Logistics Solutions, launched with fanfare that attracted attention from business magazines, industry publications, and even a few major television networks. We were featured on the cover of Supply Chain Management Today with the headline, "The Small-Town Kid Reshaping American Commerce." But the real validation came when we landed our biggest contract ever, a 5-year deal with a major e-commerce platform to handle their North American distribution network. The contract was worth over $400 million and required us to coordinate deliveries to every major metropolitan area in the United States and Canada. Managing that level of complexity required investments in technology that I'd never dreamed possible. We built a state-of-the-art operations center in Dallas. It looked more like mission control at NASA than a trucking company headquarters. Massive screens displayed real-time data on thousands of vehicles, weather patterns, traffic conditions, and delivery schedules across 2 countries. I remember the first time I walked into that operations center and realized that the shy kid from Millbrook, Ohio, was now responsible for a network that delivered millions of packages every month to businesses and families across North America. The weight of that responsibility was both exhilarating and terrifying. With great success came great scrutiny. Industry competitors who had ignored us when we were small suddenly saw us as a threat. Regulatory agencies wanted to examine our practices more closely. Financial analysts dissected our quarterly reports looking for weaknesses. The pressure was unlike anything I'd experienced. But it also validated that we'd built something truly significant. The financial rewards were substantial. My personal net worth had grown beyond anything I could have imagined when I was stocking shelves at the grocery store in Millbrook. But more importantly, we were creating jobs and opportunities for thousands of people. Former military veterans, single mothers, recent college graduates, immigrants chasing their own American dreams. Our company had become a launching pad for people who needed a chance to prove themselves. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That's when I started thinking about aviation. It's not as a hobby or a luxury, but as a business necessity. With operations spanning the continent, I was spending more time in airports and on commercial flights than I was at home. The inefficiency was killing my productivity and limiting my ability to respond quickly to crises or opportunities. Elena suggested I look into purchasing a corporate jet. At first, the idea seemed absurd. The kid who used to draw pictures of airplanes in the margins of his school notebooks couldn't possibly own a real aircraft. But the more I researched it, the more sense it made from a business perspective. Time was the most valuable resource I had, and commercial aviation was wasting enormous amounts of it. Between security lines, flight delays, and connection times, a simple business trip to the West Coast could consume an entire day. With our own aircraft, I could visit 3 cities in the time it previously took to visit one. The process of acquiring a corporate jet was more complicated than buying a company. Aviation regulations, pilot certification requirements, maintenance protocols, insurance considerations. It was like learning an entirely new language. But I threw myself into it with the same intensity I'd applied to building the business. After months of research, I settled on a Cessna Citation CJ for a mid-sized jet capable of flying coast to coast, sophisticated enough to handle complex weather conditions but not so large that it required specialized airport facilities. The price tag was substantial. But when I calculated the time savings and increased business efficiency, it was actually one of the smartest investments I could make. The day I took delivery of the aircraft was surreal, standing on the tarmac at the manufacturing facility in Kansas, looking at this sleek, powerful machine that now belonged to me. I thought about all the people who had doubted whether I'd ever accomplish anything significant. The registration number painted on the side read N847DH, my initials incorporated into a tail number that would soon be filed with flight plans across the country. But owning the jet was just the beginning. I needed to learn how to operate it safely and legally. That meant hundreds of hours of flight training, written examinations, check rides with Federal Aviation Administration inspectors, and more studying than I'd done since college. Aviation doesn't forgive carelessness or shortcuts, and I was determined to do it right. My flight instructor, Captain Rebecca Morrison, was a former airline pilot who had transitioned to corporate aviation training. She was demanding, detail-oriented, and completely intolerant of anything less than perfection. Under her guidance, I learned not just how to fly the aircraft, but how to think like a pilot, always considering weather, always planning for contingencies, always prioritizing safety above convenience. The training took 8 months to complete. When I finally passed my final check ride and received my type rating for the citation, Captain Morrison shook my hand and said something I'll never forget. "Derek, you've got good judgment and respect for the machine. That's what separates pilots who have long careers from pilots who have short ones." My first solo cross-country flight in the citation was from Dallas to Seattle for a client meeting. As I climbed through 35,000 feet, watching the landscape of Texas give way to New Mexico and then Arizona, I felt a sense of freedom and accomplishment that was unlike anything I'd experienced in business. This wasn't just about efficiency or productivity. This was about pushing boundaries and refusing to accept limitations. The jet transformed how I ran the business. Instead of being confined to conference calls and video meetings, I could show up in person when it mattered most. A crisis in Vancouver? I could be there in 4 hours. An opportunity in Miami? 3.5 hours. The ability to respond quickly to situations gave us a competitive advantage that our larger rivals couldn't match. But the real impact was on my relationship with our employees and clients. When you show up in person, especially when you've flown, yourself there in your own aircraft, it sends a message about commitment and priorities that no amount of video conferencing can replicate. Clients were impressed, employees felt valued, deals that might have taken weeks to close were settled in a single afternoon. Word of my aviation activities eventually filtered back to Millbrook through the small-town network that connects everyone who ever lived in places like that. My mother would occasionally mention that so-and-so had heard about the airplane, or that someone had seen a news article about the company's success. But she also mentioned that Patricia was still holding court at the post office and the grocery store, still predicting that my success was temporary and that I'd eventually get my comeuppance. Pride comes before the fall, Patricia apparently told anyone who would listen. That boy's gotten too big for his britches. Mark my words, he'll crash and burn, and when he does, he'll come crawling back to Millbrook with his tail between his legs. Part of me wanted to let it go, to rise above the petty comments and focus on building something meaningful. But another part of me, the 12-year-old boy who had been told he'd never amount to anything, was still keeping score. Success wasn't just about financial metrics or business achievements. It was about proving that dreams and determination could overcome small-town limitations and closed-minded thinking. That's when I started planning something that would make a statement impossible to ignore. The idea struck me during a late night flight from Los Angeles back to Dallas. I was cruising at 41,000 feet. The cabin dark except for the soft glow of the instrument panel. When I realized that my 20th high school reunion was coming up in 3 months. Most of my classmates had never left Ohio. They were teachers, farmers, shop owners, bank tellers, good, honest people living meaningful lives within the boundaries they'd chosen or that had been chosen for them. But I had a different story to tell. And suddenly, I knew exactly how I wanted to tell it. The logistics of what I was planning were complex. Millbrook's tiny municipal airport couldn't accommodate a citation. The runway was too short and the infrastructure too limited. But there was farmland everywhere around the town, including the sprawling corn and soybean fields that belonged to the Hendricks family, who who lived right next door to Patricia, Tom Hendricks had been farming that land for over 30 years. His property included nearly 400 acres of flat, well-maintained fields that would be harvested by early October, leaving plenty of open space. More importantly, Tom had always been supportive of my ambitions, even when others in town were skeptical. I called Tom on a Tuesday morning and explained what I wanted to do. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he started laughing. "Derek, you want to land an airplane in my cornfield just to make a point to your aunt?" "It's not just about Patricia," I explained, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "I want to show the kids in Millbrook that there's a whole world out there beyond the county line. Sometimes people need to see possibilities demonstrated in ways they can't ignore." Tom agreed, but only after I assured him that I'd handle all the legal requirements, insurance liability, and field restoration. What I didn't tell him was that I had already contacted the Federal Aviation Administration about the feasibility of creating a temporary private airstrip on his property. The regulatory process was more involved than I'd anticipated. The FAA required detailed surveying of the proposed landing area, environmental impact assessments, and coordination with local air traffic control. I had to prove that the field was long enough, flat enough, and free of obstacles that could pose hazards to aircraft operations, while navigating the bureaucratic requirements. I was also managing the most successful period in Horizon Logistics history. We just signed contracts with 2 additional Fortune 500 companies and were in negotiations to acquire a smaller competitor based in Atlanta. The business was consuming enormous amounts of my time and energy, but I was determined to make this homecoming happen. Alina thought I was losing my mind. "Derek, you're planning to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and risk regulatory complications just to impress people in a town you left 15 years ago? What's the point?" I tried to explain that it wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about completing a circle that had started when I was 12 years old and Tricia first told me I'd never leave Millbrook. But even as I said it, I knew Alina was partially right. This was about proving something. Maybe that proving was more important to me than I wanted to admit. The technical challenges were substantial. Landing on an unpaved field required different techniques than operating from standard airports. The Citation's landing gear and tires needed special inspection procedures. I had to account for softer ground conditions, potential debris, and the lack of standard runway markings or lighting systems. Captain Morrison agreed to accompany me on the flight as a safety pilot, but only after I'd completed additional training. On soft field operations and emergency procedures, we practiced approaches to grass strips in Kansas and Missouri, simulating the conditions I'd encounter in Tom's cornfield. This is either the most elaborate practical joke in aviation history, or you've got some serious unfinished business back home. Captain Morrison observed after one particularly challenging practice session. Meanwhile, word was spreading through Millbrook's gossip network that something unusual was being planned. Tom's applications for temporary land use permits had attracted attention at the county courthouse. The local newspaper ran a small item speculating that a former resident was planning some kind of aviation event for the high school reunion. Weekend Patricia, according to my mother, was dismissing the rumors as typical Derek nonsense and predicting that whatever I was planning would end in embarrassment and failure. "That boy's always been more talk than action," she apparently told the ladies at her bridge club. "He thinks he can show up here like some big shot, but we all know who he really is." 2 weeks before the reunion, I received final approval from all the regulatory agencies. Tom's cornfield was officially designated as a temporary private airstrip for a 72-hour period. The insurance policies were in place. The field had been surveyed and marked. Captain Morrison had signed off on the safety procedures. But the real preparation was emotional. It wasn't just about flying an airplane into a cornfield. It was about confronting 20 years of doubts, limitations, and other people's expectations about who I was supposed to be. The 12-year-old boy who had been told he'd never amount to anything was finally going to have his say. The morning of the flight dawned, clear and calm, perfect conditions for what I was attempting. I arrived at the Dallas Executive Airport before sunrise, conducting a thorough pre-flight inspection of the Citation while Captain Morrison reviewed weather reports and filed our flight plan with air traffic control. The flight to Ohio took 2.5 hours. As we approached the Millbrook area, I contacted the Regional Air Traffic Control Center to confirm our clearance for the approach to Tom's temporary airstrip. The controller sounded amused when he read back our destination coordinates. Citation: 847DH. You're cleared for approach to Hendricks Private. That's definitely a first for us. Circling the field at 3,000 feet, I could see cars already gathering along the county roads that bordered Tom's property. Word had apparently spread that something significant was happening. In the distance, I could make out the white, colonial house on Maple Street where Patricia lived. Her backyard garden clearly visible from the air. Captain Morrison handled the radio communications while I focused on the approach. Landing on an unpaved field required precise airspeed control and a gentle touchdown to avoid damaging the aircraft or creating a cloud of dust and debris. The Citation settled onto Tom's field with barely a bump, the tires finding solid purchase. On the packed earth, as we taxied toward the designated parking area Tom had prepared, I could see the crowd of spectators growing larger. Pickup trucks, SUVs, and cars were pulling up along the field's perimeter. People were getting out, pointing, taking pictures with their phones. Children were running toward the fence line, their parents following behind. When I shut down the engines and opened the cabin door, the silence was remarkable. No air traffic control frequencies crackling through the radio, no runway noise, just the peaceful quiet of rural Ohio on a Saturday morning. The smell of fresh earth and corn stubble filled the cabin as I prepared to step outside. Tom was the first person to reach the aircraft, a huge grin on his weathered face. Derek, that was something else. I've been farming this land for 30 years and never thought I'd see a jet airplane parked in my cornfield. Behind Tom came a steady stream of curious neighbors, former classmates, and townspeople who had heard about the unusual arrival. Some I recognized immediately: Mrs. Patterson from the hardware store, Coach Williams from high school, the Johnson twins who had been in my graduating class. Others had changed so much that I had to wait for introductions to place them. But the person I was really looking for was standing on her back porch, about 200 yards away, still holding her morning coffee cup. Patricia had come outside to see what all the commotion was about. She was staring at the Citation with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. I walked across the field toward her house, my dress shoes crunching on the corn stubble, while Captain Morrison stayed with the aircraft to answer questions from the growing crowd of aviation enthusiasts. With each step, I felt like I was walking backward through time, returning to conversations and confrontations that had shaped the last 20 years of my life. Patricia was still standing on her porch when I reached her property line. She looked older, of course, but her posture was exactly the same, arms crossed, chin slightly raised, ready to deliver judgment on whatever foolishness she was witnessing. "Hello, Patricia," I said, stopping at the bottom of her porch steps. She studied me for a long moment, taking in the business suit I'd worn for the flight, the expensive watch, the confidence that came from years of making decisions that affected thousands of people. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than I remembered. "Derek, I heard you were doing well for yourself." "I can't complain," I replied, glancing back at the Citation, which was now surrounded by what looked like half the town. "Business has been good." "That's your airplane? It belongs to the company?" "But yes, I fly it myself. Got my pilot's license a few years ago." Patricia set down her coffee cup and walked to the edge of her porch. For the first time in my memory, she seemed to be searching for words instead of having them ready to fire like ammunition. "You know," she said finally, "when you were a boy, always drawing those airplane pictures, I thought you were just daydreaming, wasting time on impossible things. I remember. I was wrong." The admission seemed to cost her something. I was wrong about a lot of things. The conversation that followed wasn't the dramatic confrontation I'd imagined during all those years of building my success. There was no moment of vindication, no triumphant speech about proving people wrong. Instead, there was just an honest exchange between two people who had misjudged each other for too long. Patricia explained that her certainty about my limitations hadn't come from malice. but from her own fears about what happened to people who reached too far beyond their circumstances. She'd grown up during the Depression, when dreams were luxuries that most families couldn't afford. Her generation had learned to temper expectations, to find security within familiar boundaries. "I didn't want to see you get hurt," she said. "Boys from places like Millbrook, they don't usually get to live the lives they dream about," I thought. "I was protecting you from disappointment." I told her about the early years of struggle, the 18-hour workdays, times when I'd questioned whether I was chasing something impossible. But I also explained how her doubts had become fuel for my determination, how the need to prove her wrong had pushed me through obstacles that might have otherwise stopped me. "Maybe that's what you needed," she said thoughtfully. "Maybe if everyone had believed in you from the beginning, you wouldn't have worked so hard to make it happen." The reunion that evening was unlike any I could have imagined. Word of the citations. Arrival had spread throughout the county, and the high school gymnasium was packed with current residents, former classmates, and people who just wanted to meet the local boy who had made good. The airplane had become a symbol of something larger than my personal success. It represented the possibility that small-town origins didn't have to limit large-scale achievements. But the most meaningful moment came when I was talking to a group of current high school students who had heard about the citation and wanted to learn about aviation and business. Their questions were eager and ambitious, exactly the kinds of questions I'd been asking at their age, the ones that had been dismissed as unrealistic daydreaming. "Mr. Hutchinson," one junior asked, "do you think someone from Millbrook could really start their own company and make it successful?" "I think," I replied, "that someone from Millbrook already did. If I can do it, there's no reason you can't. Do it too. The only limitations that really matter are the ones you accept." The flight back to Dallas the next morning was smooth and peaceful. Captain Morrison commented that the whole experience had been unlike anything in her aviation career, and she was right. This hadn't been just about flying an airplane or making a business trip. It had been about completing a journey that started with a 12-year-old boy's dreams and ended with a grown man's understanding of what it means to succeed on your own terms. As we climbed away from Ohio and turned southwest toward Texas, I looked down at Millbrook one more time. The town looked exactly the same as it had when I left. The same streets, the same houses, the same boundaries that had once seemed so confining. But my perspective had changed completely. Patricia had been wrong about my limitations, but she'd been right about one thing. I am still the same person I was when I lived in that small town. The difference is that I learned to see that as a strength rather than a weakness. The determination, work ethic, and values that shaped me in Millbrook were the same qualities that built Horizon Logistics Solutions and earned me the freedom to land a jet in a cornfield just to make a point. 6 months later, Patricia sent me a newspaper clipping. The Millbrook High School had started a new program called Aviation and Entrepreneurship, funded by a grant from an anonymous donor. Students could take classes in business planning, basic aeronautics, and career exploration designed to help them understand that their dreams didn't have to be limited by their geography. The accompanying note was short. "Derek, maybe some of these kids will surprise us all. Thank you for showing them what's possible, Patricia." I framed that note and hung it in my office, right next to a photograph of the citation parked in Tom Hendrick's cornfield. Both serve as reminders that success isn't about proving other people wrong. It's about proving yourself right, one decision at a time, one dream at a time, until the impossible becomes inevitable. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.